Hello, I'm Dr. Caroline Leaf and welcome to my podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. Okay, today's part 2 of how to deal with colliding boundaries. And please listen to part 1 because you really need part 1 to be able to follow with part 2. We're talking about 4 neurocycles that we can do to deal with when boundaries collide. We all know boundaries are so important for our mental health. People speak about them all the time. We need to know how to create them for ourselves and other people, but sometimes our boundaries collide, and what do we do? So part 1, I explained the basic science, and I spoke about the first neurocycle you can use. There's 4 that you would do, and you do them together over a period of 63 days, and however you want to do them. And you could spend 5 minutes a day. You could do all 4 in one day, or you could do one each day, or you could work through one and sort out that one, and then work out the next one, and then work out the next one, and then work out the next one over a period of maybe 3 or 4 weeks or something, or the first 21 days, and then you practice using them for the second 42 days. That would be my recommendation for following in the neurocycle system. If you want to know more about that, I have my book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and my app, the Neurocycle app, available on iTunes, Google Play, and now a web version. And in that, I show you how to rewire your brain. Take cycles of 63 days, not 1, not 4, not 7, not 40, not 21, not 42, but at least 63. So there's 4 of these neurocycles to help with dealing with colliding boundaries. They work sequentially. The first one is the self-reflection neurocycle. Then that leads to the ones we're going to talk about today, the communication, that leads to balance, and that leads to the trust neurocycle. So there's 4 of them, and probably the easiest way to do them would be to work on the self-reflection one first on your own, and do that for maybe a week. And then from then on, you work, and you're each working on it at the same time, but on your own. Then the other 3 do together, and you could maybe spend another week on communication, or 3-4 days to a week, 3 or 4 days to a week on the next one, which is going to be balance. And then the last one, which is going to be trust. It'll take you up to around 21, 28 days. And then the second phase is going to be just a few minutes a day where you're basically consciously and deliberately practicing using those new fixed up negotiated boundaries and seeing how that can impact and seeing how you can grow that. So there we go. There's a little plan for you. Okay, so let's talk today now about the first one of these, the second one, which is the communication neurocycle for colliding boundaries. So boundaries are all about communication. I mean, if you think about it, especially clear communication, it's about communication with yourself and with people you choose to surround yourself with. Boundaries are also a social commitment. So boundaries are communication with yourself and those that you surround yourself. They are a social commitment. And because they're a social commitment, there's give and take. So the communication neurocycle boundary is hugely around this give and take concept. Okay, so once you've self-reflected and done all the things I said in last week's podcast, we want to then get into this effective way of communicating with each other that is a give and take communication, which means that I really have to tune in and listen to the other person and hear what they are saying about their boundary and why they need that boundary, and they must tune into me and hear what I'm saying about my boundary and why I need it, understanding the conflict between the two, which you would have worked out a lot of that on your own in the self-reflection. Now you're coming together and you're sharing that information and working out in a give and take way how you can resolve this. In any important relationship in your life, to be in a healthy relationship, there has to be things that you give up and take away. We all know that. There has to be this giving up and taking away compromise. In my own family, I see that happening. In my own marriage of 35 years, you just kind of have to do it. It happens in the workplace. It happens with your kids. It happens everywhere. So here's a very simple example of how to do this give and take neurocycle, this give and take, or this communication. Let me say that again. Here is a simple example of the communication neurocycle in action. Okay, neurocycle's 5 steps: gather awareness, reflect, write, recheck, and active reach. Okay, so very simple example. So in this communication neurocycle example, I'm going to be talking about how myself and my daughter, my youngest daughter, I have 4 children, my youngest daughter who loves to cook, they all love to cook actually, but she loves to cook with extra special, super spicy, really tasty kind of food, and I can't eat that. I like very bland, very boring food, very plain food, and so there's a total difference in our palates. And that may sound like not such a big thing. And as I said, this is a simple example. But when you're working together and you're living together and you're traveling together and you're having social occasions together, that can be a thing. Like, I can't stand the smell of garlic and certain spices, and I react to them, and garlic's in everything, and my daughter loves cooking with garlic, and the smells around the kitchen can drive me crazy. And so this is now that's where boundaries can collide. So how did we deal with this? Obviously, we did some self-reflection, which is the first boundary. Now, the communication example is how we gathered awareness. First of all, the 5 steps. We gathered awareness. What was the actual boundary that I needed, and what was her boundary, which we had done the self-reflection on. And the boundary was that I don't like anything stinky in my kitchen, any spicy stuff, and I don't want any spicy food. And I need that because it drives me crazy, those smells. So that was my boundary. Hers was, I love spicy food, and I love cooking with it, and I want all these nice things that smell nice around me. So they collided, because I didn't want that and she wanted that. So we negotiated. So we gathered awareness of the boundary, that we named the boundary. We had self-reflected on it. And now we are communicating about it. So I gathered, because I had done the self-reflection, I could explain the boundary. She could explain her boundary. How does the smells and whatever make me feel? How does it make my body feel? How does it make what were my behaviors? I'd get irritated. I'd want to throw those things away, get rid of those smells, not eat that food. And perspective, I can't stand these smells. I can't stand this type of cooking. And my youngest daughter, what did she do? Her boundary was she likes all the spicy food. She wants to have all this nice spicy food around. She wants to be able to cook with that spicy food. She loves it. It makes her feel happy, etc. And she just enjoys it. Her perspective, it makes her happy and makes her get excited, and it makes her body feel good. Okay, so those boundaries were colliding. We named them in the gather awareness. We spoke about our signals, and then we reflected. I reflected, okay, when I get so get so frustrated, how does that affect her? Kind of upsets her, because she'd actually really love to cook a meal together and do a meal together and share let me taste her cooking, and I want her to taste mine. And so we reflected on how that made us feel. Then we wrote this down. We said, okay, well, that's your boundary, that's my boundary, that's how it makes us feel. And we communicated. We actually sat down next to each other and, wrote it on paper, and we wrote our reflection down. And then so the 3rd step is writing. The 4th step, now we looked at what we'd written, and we thought, okay, so now what can we do? How can we manage this process? So what we said is that in the gather awareness and reflect, we had spoken about the smells and whatever, and we'd written that down. So in the recheck step, looking at what we'd written, I could say, oh, okay, so you love the spicy food. So what we could do is, when we decide if you're going to do the cooking and you're going to cook that spicy food, then we can buy just enough ingredients for that day. And if there's some left over, put it in a very tight Ziploc so I don't have to smell them. And then I take some Benadryl so that I don't get a bad reaction. And then I'll taste them and eat not too much of it, but then I'll at least taste them and enjoy them. And that way I can partake of what she's done. And by the same token, she'll taste my very bland cooking. And otherwise, sometimes what she'll do is she'll make this very spicy version of a dish, and she'll make the non-spicy version for me. Or she'll make the spicy version, and I, alongside her, will make the non-spicy version. And we'll taste a little bit of each other's, but we'll eat mainly our own. So that was the plan we made in the recheck. I mean, this sounds so basic, but it was becoming a bit of a conflict, because both of us enjoy eating and cooking. And we, as a family, typically Italian, like to eat together and cook together. And seriously, I'm the boring one in the house. They all love the fancy stuff except me. So she really stepped in to try and solve this problem. And then in the act of reach, we actually carried that plan out. And we practiced that plan and we negotiate. So it was give and take. So she communicated to me that she needs her need met of having a lot of garlic and spice in meals, and we'll both adjust. Or she'll communicate that she's giving up that need for that day, and so that we can eat the same meal together. Same thing that I'll do. I'll give up my need not to have spicy food, and I'll have a little taste of it and at least share in that and take the Benadryl. So there was a give and take. So basically, when you are doing this and you get your little plan, when you find that you and the person that you have the relationship with both have boundaries that seem to be colliding, one of the most crucial steps is just to communicate. I mean, this sounds long and waffly, but took a few minutes. We tried it out a few times. Now it's become a habit, and now we've carried that over into other little areas of boundaries that were colliding. We communicated. We both was a give and take on both sides, and it led to a deeper, meaningful connection. It improved our relationship. The simple thing about spicy versus non-spicy cooking. So when you're communicating, you are basically giving the reasons for your boundaries and the needs that they fulfill and why they're important to you and whoever that other person is. And also, it's so important that this is done without anger and frustration, because boundaries are about respect for each other, for yourself and for each other. And so you want to be able to respect each other's boundaries. And honestly, it ended up being really funny. We were really laughing. And now, instead of me being offended when she says, "Oh, you got boring food," or me being irritated when she always wants the spicy food, it's not an issue. It's no longer an issue that collides. It's now something quite funny between all of us. So then this leads me to the next one, is the Balance Neurocycle, to deal with colliding boundaries, and self-reflection and the communication lead directly into the balance. So you've self-reflected, you've done the communication thing, and immediately that leads into the Balance Neurocycle. Basically, when we talk about balance, we're talking about making sure that both people's needs are met. So in self-reflection and communication, the first two neurocycles for dealing with colliding boundaries, we get data. Okay, so we get data about what we need, what the other person needs, what's colliding, how it makes us feel, how we can potentially change it. Then we go into the communication element, the interactive element, where we, once again, out now talking, gather awareness, reflect, write, work it out, put it in practice. Now, those two steps gave us data. We have data, we have information. And with that information in our hand, we can now move forward and take this even deeper to make sure that we get a good balance. So we have more because we've got more information to evaluate. Now, I know that simple spicy example is, doesn't sound like it needs 63 days to practice. It sounds like you can sort that out in, just one neurocycle, which you can. Some of these things, these colliding boundaries, one neurocycle may sort that out. And if you see the problem arising again, you maybe need to do it over, a few more of them. And if it still is a problem, then do the full 63 days, because the potential is that it hasn't become a pattern yet. If it's become a pattern in both your lives, then it's going to take longer. So the more deep emotional stuff generally are already patterns, so they take the full 63 days to unwire. But I wanted to give you a simple example just to understand it. Okay, so now with the balance, the third one in a row, self-reflection, communication, balance, neurocycle for dealing with colliding boundaries, you are basically looking at the data gathered from self-reflection and communication, and you're using that data to take it even deeper. So basically in the gather awareness, you're looking at whether the boundaries set by both parties, whether it's a group of people, partners, children, adults, parents and a child, whatever, are set by all people involved, are balanced, okay, and lead to a balanced relationship. So people don't feel that it's unbalanced, that person's more geared to keeping that person happy or more geared towards keeping you happy, because that can happen even in the self-reflection and even in the communication. It can maybe become a bit unbalanced. And some really dumb example, maybe I want the bland food 3 times more than the spicy food. That's unbalanced. So you have to work out, when you're together, there has to be an even share. When you're on your own, you can do what you want, kind of thing. But when you're together in the same house and eating together, there has to be this balance achieved. So basically, you want to gather awareness of, do you feel, looking at your signals, name the adjusted boundaries, and then look at the point where you're at and say, okay, do I feel, both of you do it together, do we feel that this is balanced? How is this manifesting in our behaviors? How is this manifesting in how our body feels? How is this manifesting in our perspective? So if we feel it's balanced, we're going to feel a sense of peace. We're going to feel okay in our body. We're going to be communicating fine. Things are going great. And in terms of perspective, hey, there's no issue here. If it's not balanced, we see the opposite. Maybe feel some frustration, a little bit of irritation, maybe a bit of a tension in the body, a bit of tension in the shoulders, a bit of tension when you're around that person. So not to relax in your behaviors. Perspective is, is this going to work? So you want to evaluate that honestly with each other. And then whatever you get from that, you're reflecting on, okay, why do I feel it's unbalanced? And you explore. So whether maybe the giving or taking is fair, maybe it's not fair. That's the sort of thing you can ask yourself. You can reflect on that. Essentially, you'll find out in this, as you find out from self-reflection and communication, that you're much more ready to dive into this balance one and negotiate because of the data and the experience of going through the first two. If you dive straight into the balance, you've missed out on the self-reflection and the communication. So the balance is not that easy to achieve. The balance is easy to achieve when you've done the other two first. So in balancing it, it's really looking at your signals and really then reflecting on, okay, we don't feel balanced. I feel it's going more in this direction. You feel it's going more in that direction. This is making us feel, let's write this down. Let's recheck. Okay, let's time track this. Let's see, okay, 5 times you cooked the spicy food and 7 times I cooked the bland food. And now I'm wanting the 8th time. So there's a bit of, it's a dumb example, but it gives you an idea. Time track it. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, how. In that, when you write it down together and reflect, you really want to go into the depth and write down in sentences, because when you write down, you dig deep and you see stuff that isn't there, and it might bring up other things. It might bring up, oh, you know what, this is not about the food, this is actually about something else. Okay, well, let's deal with the food one, and then we'll do another whole round of colliding boundaries neurocycles to sort out the next thing. In this balance step, once you've communicated your needs and heard the other person's needs, which you practiced in the communication neurocycle, you may begin trying to find a solution that involves giving and taking on both parts that can help you navigate the colliding boundaries with little or no resentment. So balance is making sure that there isn't resentment, because what can happen in self-reflection is you get insight. In communication, you communicate this and you start doing it. Then as you're doing it, you see it's unbalanced. So that's when the communication, using self-reflection and communication inside the balance, you're able to now resolve that. You're able to see, okay, there is imbalance, but we've practiced self-reflection, we've practiced communication. So we can get to a negotiation around this collision without much resentment, because we already did the other 2 steps, the other 2 neurocycles. Now we can do this. Then remember, when you are rechecking in the balance thing, finding balance will take practice. So if it's something simple, it's easy, but when it's something not so simple, it may take a little bit of, looking at practicing, a few times through the neurocycle and getting to this recheck stage where, okay, we tried this worked for a while, but it didn't work, this rose its head. So it's thrown the balance off again. So now we need to deal with this issue. Now you do it some more, and you self-reflection and communication, and the balance is there for a while, then the balance goes off, and then you may need to go and say, okay, let's recheck it again, let's go through the whole thing, let's recheck it, and let's see, okay, it went off there, how can we resolve that? And you just keep adjusting. Okay, so, and you can do this without resentment and frustration, because you're working through this in such an organized way. You're not doing this from, your emotions aren't controlling you, emotions aren't spilling out all over the place. They're under control by doing it through the neurocycle. Then this leads to the final one, which is quick and easy, which is trust. Once I've self-reflected, I've done the work of looking at myself. That gives a person a great signal. I'm communicating. I'm trying to achieve balance, and not just me, the other person self-reflecting, working on communication, working on balance, and we adjusting. So now trust is building. And you may just want to then, at some point in the cycle, just stop and say, okay, or even straight after if you find that there's an imbalance, you may want to flow straight into the trust neurocycle. It may pop up in sequence, or it may be that the trust is going to come up as the imbalance is identified and you can't seem to resolve the balance. It could be that then it feels like there's a bit of a trust issue, and you may need to then just take your time and actually say, okay, you know what, let's work on trusting each other. We're not trusting each other that we are actually going to maintain our side and stay within these adjusted boundary framework. So let's look at our trust. So let's gather awareness through the 4 signals. Each person, how are you feeling? What are you saying and doing? How does your body feel? What is your perspective? And the other person, why do you think we're doing this? Let's write this down and let's recheck on it. So basically, you are looking in the gather awareness of the trust neurocycle. You're trying to make sure that, are you willing to trust that each other will still respect this new negotiated boundary? Maybe there's a little bit of, I'm going to stick to it, but are they going to stick to it? So you may just need to work through this a few times to see, hey, listen, I need to know I can trust that you're going to stick to your side of the bargain. And then as you reflect, just going back to the silly example that I gave you, to go back to that example, when my daughter decides to take out and make food that I'm not able to eat, I trust that won't always be the case. It's what she wants to do now. She really feels like it. And she's assured me through the fact that she often will make two versions of the food. She'll make the bland one for me and the fancy one for her. So she's assured me. So I know that there's this trust. Same thing on my side. She knows that I'm not going to freak out every time she goes and buys garlic and all the fancy spices and puts them in the fridge and that kind of thing. Because I know that it's not going to be like that all the time. So then basically an example of rechecking the trust neurocycle is, what is our plan to keep the trust up? Sometimes we need a little plan, because maybe you don't see each other for a while, or maybe you slip into bad habits, or maybe the adjusted boundaries start slipping. So what is a good plan? So it could be something like, hey, I feel like you're not really sticking to your side. I've noticed this a couple of times. How do you feel? Do you feel like that about this? This is what I'm noticing. So you gather awareness, you go through the emotions, you reflect a little bit, you write it down, and your recheck is, okay, yeah, you know what, maybe I have slipped a little bit, the other person says, or maybe they say, no, I don't think I've slipped, I think you've slipped. And so you talk it through. Okay, what we're going to do, what's our plan? And then you show it with actions. So again, this is a simple example of my daughter and myself. But the idea is that we can build trust through forming a habit of respect for each other, through working through self-respect, working through communication, working through balance, and working through the trust neurocycles to deal with the colliding boundaries. We have a plan in place. I'm giving you a plan that when your very important boundaries collide, here's what you can do. You can sit down with someone and you can go through these things, even if they feel a bit messy and they don't follow the order perfectly and you jump around, you're not quite sure what you're doing. Re-listen to this podcast a few times so you get the hang of it and practice doing it. Just the mere fact that you're going to work on each of these different neurocycles and take the time to do it, that is going to improve the relationship already and help with those colliding boundaries. So by practicing the first three neurocycles, you can move forward with trust into the fourth neurocycle. And even then, as I've explained to you, you can adjust as necessary. Remember that healthy relationships take work. So here's 4 neurocycles that are going to help you solve the inevitable clash of boundaries that you maybe hadn't even verbalized. You may not have even realized that you'd set a boundary for yourself and that person had set a boundary. And you may find that in a relationship collision, it was actually a colliding boundary. So here's now a way of working through those colliding boundaries. So these neurocycles are really helpful for just dealing with relationship issues. So when we want someone in our lives, we can't expect them to change everything for us and do nothing for them. So if you want someone in your life, you can't expect them to change everything and you don't change everything. Or you can't expect them to change everything and you change nothing. It works both ways. Okay? So we've both got to change. It's about mutual change, mutual respect. And by sitting down and kind of messing your way through these 4 neurocycles, you have made a commitment to each other. Hey, I love you. I care for you. I'm prepared to sit down and muddle my way through these self-reflection 5 steps and balance 5 steps and communication 5 steps and trust 5 steps and keep adjusting and do this over time so that we can improve our relationship. And that's sending a really healthy relationship. The more we practice this in a relationship, the more healthy the relationship becomes. Thank you for joining me. I hope this helps you. Send me your testimonies of how your colliding boundaries have uncollided. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.